Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Carice, Witte, Bradley Bowman, and Dan Perry. Thank you all very much for staying with us. We're also, of course, staying on topic. But before we get back to the conversation, remember that alleged, at least, slip of the tongue. The American president says, well, no biggie. This authoritarian ruler remark. This is what I'm referring to. Let's take a listen to the American president.
The Secretary Blinken had a great trip to China. I expect to be meeting with President Xi sometime in the future, in the near term, and I don't think it's had any real consequence. And what was your second question?
Yeah, so Biden downplaying the significance of this remark, but will his slip of the tongue be Xi's potential casus belli? Is it provoking China to an extent? Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and we'll pick it up from there. Bradley Bowman, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
You know, as FTD's president, Cliff May, said in his column today in the Washington Times, it was a diplomatic faux pas for President Biden to call Xi a dictator. But, there is this little factoid. He is a dictator, right? He's the classic definition of a dictator, an autocrat. And under Marxist ideology, that's something to be proud of. And so, it's important to call a spade, but when you are the leader of the United States, you have to be more careful. And this is not Biden's first slip of the tongue.
Yeah, calling a spade a dictator. Dan Perry.
Well, I mean, well before Biden was known as president or even vice president, he was known for his gaffes. So I don't think anyone is shocked, least of all Xi. Moreover, look, I mean, these two countries have a real rivalry in almost every way. It's pretty extreme, but I think it's also under control so long as China doesn't do anything untoward in Taiwan. I think that's more or less where we stand on the casus belli.
Carice, Witte?
Yeah, I'm going to take it to Taiwan as well. That's where there could be trouble. And I think it's also a matter of the United States making sure that there's no mistakes. That will be the focus of, that is the hot spot where everyone is worried. Certainly, I think it's more concerning that there's no military-to-military communication between the U.S. and China, where both of them are deeply embedded in the Taiwan Straits, and anything could happen at any time.
Well, let's circle back to Biden's statement referring to the recent Blinken visit, this emergency visit. Was it a success, a failure? Did it achieve anything, really, Carice?
They had very low expectations, and they met them. There was a long and serious talk between the Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister, Qin Gang. Blinken also had an opportunity to speak to Wang Yi. He did get a bit chewed out, but it wasn't terrible. And a meeting with Xi Jinping as well. And I think that there is an understanding by both countries that not only is it good for them to lower the temperature, but the world needs them to lower the temperature. And they will be suffering a lot of criticism globally if they don't do it. On the China side, China, I talked about the numbers game in the United Nations. That is very real for China. And when you see yourself as the head of the global South or 130 plus countries, you don't want to upset all of them by doing things that can lead to a potential global conflagration.
Yeah, Bradley Bowman.
The U.S.-China bilateral relationship, speaking of bilateral relationships, is the most influential and consequential in the world and will likely be for decades to come. And if there's a sneeze in this bilateral relationship, the world's going to catch a cold. And so it needs to be managed responsibly on both sides. I think it's clear where the primary source of tension is coming from in this relationship. It's Taiwan. And let's be clear. Let's be more specific. What about Taiwan? It's the increasingly aggressive military posturing of the People's Liberation Army in the seas and skies around Taiwan, and the refusal to take military force off the table. That is the source of tension. So if there's going to be a conflict here, it's not going to be started by the United States. It's going to be Beijing initiating aggression against the 25 million people in Taiwan who want to be free and don't want to see what happened to them, what happened in Hong Kong.
But would the basic strategic positions of both remain unchanged? Are we on the road to nowhere? Is there any scenario of of de-escalation, or is it just, an inevitable course, collision course at some point, Dan Perry?
I mean, I think it largely depends on Xi. As has been said, China's saber-rattling, in a way, vis-a-vis Taiwan is what is the source of most of the tension. It's not the only thing. I mean, there's also the matter of Xi's pulling back on any notion of liberalization of China, his engineering of a third term, and movement towards the status of being pretty close to a dictator, as has been said. None of that pleases the West. All of it creates a certain sense of unpredictability about China, because as with Putin, when one man is a dictator, and it's not quite the same, but it's sort of moving that direction, you never know what he's going to do. I think China has a lot of levers to project to the world that despite all these things, it wants to be a team player on the world stage. It has a lot of areas in which it can play a positive role, beginning perhaps with Russia, Ukraine. So it's largely up to Xi. And since he is a clever fellow, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him lower the flames, because I think it does benefit China at this particular time.
I want to add that it is not only because of China that there could be a conflict. If there is an accident, if something happens accidentally and an American dies, or something happens and, I don't know, Chinese die, it will, even though there's no attempt to take over, because of the accident, you could have a really terrible situation. That's one point I want to make. The other is that we're leaving out one of the most important factors in the China-U.S. conflict, and that is technology. And that puts Israel in the crosshairs on the one hand, but the bigger picture, technology, whoever owns the fourth industrial revolution technology is going to receive a coupon from the world. And if it is divided up among the two great powers and then maybe some other powers, it's one thing. But if it's all in the hands of one or the other, that, depending on which set of hands it's in, it could lead to a complete reshaping of global governance, and the world could look very, very different from what we're seeing today.
If Netanyahu really wants to teach...
one sec. Yeah, Bradley, please.
The emphasis on technology is so rightly stated, and let's be clear, that's the primary reason why China is interested in Israel. Israel is not a superpower, but it is a technology superpower, and that's the number one thing that the PRC and the PLA want from China. They want from Israel. They want Israel's technology to create national champion Chinese companies and to funnel that technology to the People's Liberation Army so it can be used against American forces in the Taiwan Strait on or about 2027. So that's the primary thing China wants from Israel, and that should inform our previous discussion about the Prime Minister's visit. And I would highlight also, I agree, there's danger of miscalculation here. That's why the Biden administration has been pressing for these military-to-military hotlines, if you will, which Beijing has resisted. So, I realize we want to say, hey, there's good and bad people on both sides. You want to create moral equivalency here. But, the primary conflict is going to come from Chinese aggression in the Taiwan Strait. And the United States is saying, hey, let's manage this. Let's have a range of people talking to one another to manage crises so that the little things don't become big. But they've been resistant to have that military-to-military communication, which is deeply short-sighted, I think.
Dan Perry?
Well, I was just going to say that, indeed, if Netanyahu really wants to show the Americans who's boss, then yeah, he can try to defy the various bans on selling China certain technologies that the U.S. does not want sold, up to and including defense technologies. But, one thing I think needs to be said here, because we're presenting China as potentially the aggressor, and no doubt in a way that's true on Taiwan, but the broader perspective is it is the U.S. and the West that genuinely wants to change the Chinese system. And that is a form of aggression that is perhaps at the root of part of China's defensive stance. And China, I don't think, wants to change the American system or change the system in the European Union. That's something that I think we need to remember, just as perspective and a little bit of humility as well.
Yeah, well, World War Chip. Right? On that note, Bradley Bowman, Carice, Witte, Dan Perry, thank you very much. It was fascinating, as per always, listening to you. Thank you very much for your time, your insight. We appreciate it.